Good afternoon, all the nerds out there. I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? Today we are diving into a fascinating topic which is structuralism. As you can see over your screen, we're gonna look every single thing about structuralism. So it's kind of literally, mean demystifying structuralism. We're gonna talk about Ferdinand de Saussure, Roman Jakobson, Roland Barthes, Northrop Frye, and many more. So, I promise we won't get too bogged down in complex terminology of structuralism and literary criticism language. We're gonna just talk in very simple language so that you can understand. Right? So think of it as our guide to understanding the hidden structures that shape our world, especially in the realm of language and beyond. So let's start at the beginning. So I'll just show you the first slide here. It's on the screen. Here we're gonna talk about the introduction to structuralism, little bit about it. As you can see, the dates 1949 to 1960. So remember, these are the period that structuralism emerged, right? So structuralism is like the cool uncle who first showed up in the late 1940s, and it borrowed a lot of its ideas from linguistic. Remember that, linguistic. So imagine yourself as a detective and you're trying to unravel the secret of a big intricate puzzle. Well, structuralism is all about treating different fields as this complex system of interrelated parts. Now, the term here, what is structuralism? So, structuralism was actually coined by a guy named Titchener. But as we can see, the most valuable player here is Ferdinand de Saussure. And he dropped the knowledge bomb in his course in general linguistics back in 1916. Saussure was all about this idea that language is a system of signs that people came up with through conventions. So these signs are like the building blocks of meaning. In Europe, Saussure ideas spread like wildfire. You had the Geneva School, remember the Prague Linguistic Circle that we talked about in formalism session. And there is also the Copenhagen School, the Paris School, and even the Dutch School, all are embracing structuralism. So it was like a linguistic party. So now the core concept of a structuralism or a structural linguistic is the sign. Remember that. So what is sign? So picture this. A sign has two parts, like a dynamic duo. First, you have got the signifier, as you can see, which is like the costume a superhero wears. And its means of expressing the part, the second part, which is our signify. This is the actual idea or concept the sign represents. So when someone says tree, the sound tree is the signifier and the concept of a tree is the signified. Got it? So anyway, when we talk about Ferdinand de Saussure, we'll go even deeper into these sign, signifying and signified, right? So the power of a sign doesn't just come from what it is, but how it relates to other signs. The power of sign doesn't just come from what it is, but how it relates to other signs. The more you compare signs, the more you understand their value and how they fit into the big picture. Right, so structuralism is all about seeing language as this dynamic system of interconnected elements. It's like a web of meaning that shapes our world. It's also the granddaddy of semiotics that we already talked. So, which is like the science of science. Now, the fast forward a bit, in our next session, we're going to talk about post-structuralism. So, they take a structuralism idea and run with it, showing now language shapes our understanding of the world. It's like a structuralism rebellious teenager. And there is a bunch of cool thinkers associated with the structuralism. You can see all the names here over your screen. We have Saussure, Roman Jakobson, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Marxist philosopher Louis Althusser, Roland Barthes, very important in structuralism, and Mikhail Bakhtin, Yuri Lottman, Umberto Eco, Jake Herman, Northrop Frye, Jonathan Kuehler. All these we're going to discuss one by one. Got it? And now we're going to move straight to our superstar, or you can say most valuable player in structuralism, and who is Ferdinand de Saussure. And we're going to talk about Nature of the Linguistic Sign course in general linguistics, which was published in 1960. So before that, we just need to know about who is Ferdinand de Saussure. Now, who was this Saussure guy? Well, he was a Swiss linguist, philosopher, and semiotician. That's someone who studies signs, right, and symbols. He's basically a big deal in the world of language. So Saussure is often hailed as the father of modern linguistics. Yeah, you heard me right. He set the stage of all those cool language developments we have seen in the 20th century. One of his greatest hits is the idea of structuralism. It's like the blueprint of understanding how language works. Now let's get into some jargon. Saussure had these three fancy terms. As you can see, speech, language, speaking, or in a simple word, parole, langue, and language. He wrote this essay called Nature of the Linguistic Sign. Where he shook up our ideas about how we distinguish things through language. Saussure wanted us to think about three important categories, as you can see here: signs, signifiers, and signified. So what is signifiers here, or a sign or signified? So signs, as we already talked in the beginning of our lecture, they are like the magic glue that holds language together. They're made up of two elements. One is signifiers and signified. Signifiers are the spoken or written forms. Basically, the words themselves. When you say a dog, that's a signifier. And what is signified here then? Signified is the concept or the idea attached to the signifier. So when you say dog, you're thinking about that furry little pet of yours, right? So together, these signifiers and signified create semiotics, which is just a fancy word for the study of signs and symbol. Right? It's like a secret language that everything uses. Now, the sign represents the connection between these two, signifier and the signified. So when you say dog, you are not just making noise, you're actually creating a mental link between the word and your four-legged friend, right? So Saussure even said that every word has a sound image in our minds. It's like a mental picture that connects the word to thing it represents. So this idea is the heart and soul of how we make meaning in language and literature. So guys, there you have it. This is about Saussure linguistic wonderland. Now we'll move immediately to one of the important thing, and which is langue and parole. And you get at least one question based on that in your exam. So in that point of view, it becomes very important that you should be completely aware of these two things, which is langue and parole. So let me decode this important terms. Right. So now we are going to dive into a bit of linguistic history. Okay. Courtesy of our course in general linguistics. which is by Saussure, right? So now this book is like the original or OGs of structural linguistics. And it's got some cool concepts that we're gonna talk about. So Saussure, as we know, he's the Swiss linguist who dropped some knowledge between 1916 to 1911 in lectures at the University of Geneva. So this was all compiled in a book, all these lectures. So his ideas changed the game. And let me tell you, first off, he brought up the idea of lang. So now what is lang, you may ask? So now lang is like the rule book of a language. It's the abstract set of rules and conventions that make a language tick. Think of it as the backstage of a crew of a play. And you don't see them, right? But without them, the show can't go on. So lang is like the principles of language, and without it, our everyday speech, or in a simple word you can ask, it is parole, would be kind of hot a mess, right? So speaking of parole, that's the everyday stuff. It's like when we are actually using language, like talking, writing, all that jazz, no? Parole is the real deal. And it's as diverse as the people using language. So if you have ever wondered why your friend's speech is different from yours, well, it's because of their unique parole. Now here's a fun part. In French, they have got two words for language. One is langue, is used for a specific language like French or English, while another is language, is all about language as a universal thing. Like the ability humans have to, speak and stuff, all these things. And the cool part is, Saussure wasn't just talking about words and grammar, he was digging into the deep hidden structures of language, the stuff that keeps it all together, right? So, in a nutshell, Saussure was all about looking behind the scenes at the rules and structure that make language work, and that's lang. While also recognize the wild and diverse ways we actually use language every day. That's parole. Two more terms are here that we'll see: arbitrariness and sign and value. Saussure believed that there is no magical or natural reason why a particular word sounds the way it does or represent a specific thing. He called this the arbitrariness of the sign, which basically means that the connection between a word, the sound or symbol, and what it stands for, the concept is pretty random. Think about it. Why is a dog called a dog and not something else? It's just a bunch of lines, right? Or sounds that we have all agreed on. So that is arbitrariness. Sign and value. So Saussure had this cool idea that the value of sign, like a word, is determined by all the other signs in the language, which he called lang. Imagine each word in a language as a part of big interconnected web. The meaning of one word is shaped by the presence and absence of other words in this web. I'll just go one more time. So this lang and parole was introduced in course in general linguistic, right? So Saussure thought on all this stuff are kind of neatly packed into his famous work called Course in General Linguistic. It's like the Bible of modern linguistics. In there, he breaks down the concept of lang, the language system, language, how we use language, and parole, actual speech act, and signs, which are where the signifier, the word or symbol, right, meets the signified, the concept. So on quick note, Saussure has split a sign into two parts, right? The signifier is the word or symbol like apple. The signified is the mental concept, the idea of a juicy red fruit. Together they make up the sign. It's like the tag team champions of a language. So what's the big takeaway here? Language is a bit of a wacky, arbitrary thing. The words we use to communicate are just sounds or symbols that we have completely agreed on, and their meanings are shaped by their relationship within the vast linguistic web. It's like a giant, intricate puzzle we are all piecing together as we go. So, guys, this is all about. Next, we're going to talk about Roman Jacobson. We have already had a very long session on Roman Jacobson in our formalism, but he's very important in structuralism as well. So I'll just move quickly because everything I have put in one slide. First off, Jacobson was one of the OGs of structural linguistics. He, along with his buddy Nikolai Trubetskoy, cooked up some mind-blowing techniques to analyze language, especially sound, language sounds. They basically laid the foundation for modern phonology. Jacobson didn't stop at sounds. He extended his linguistic magic to syntax, morphology, and semantic. He was like the Indiana Jones of language, exploring every nook and cranny. Jacobson ideas didn't stay in a dusty old linguistic textbook. He influenced heavyweights like Claude Lévi-Strauss and Roland Barthes. So you all must have heard about Chomsky, right? He's a kind of a big deal in linguistics, right? So Jacobson's ideas played a massive role in shaping Chomsky's early thinking. Jacobson wasn't just about abstract theories. He gave us a practical breakdown of how language works in communication. He said there are 6 functions: referential, context, right, aesthetic, emotive, cognitive, phatic, and metalingual. And basically he covered all the bases. And we also came across 2 aspects of language, right? So Jacobson dropped knowledge bombs about metaphor and metonymy that we already discussed in for formalism, right? So these aren't just fancy words, they are crucial for understanding how language works. And there was another thing, translation, that Jacobson talked about, right? And Jacobson also tackled translation. He said the meaning of a word is all about how it's used in language. It can happen in 3 ways: within the same language, which is like intralingual that we talked about, swapping one word for another in different language, that is interlingual, or even switching between different forms of communication. It's like language acrobatics, right? So there you have it. This is all about Roman Jacobson. We have just gone briefly here because already we discussed in detail in our formalism class that you can see, right? You can watch that and you will get all idea about it. But anyway, that's all for Roman Jacobson. We'll just move immediately to Claude Lévi-Strauss, and especially The Savage Mind, which was published in 1962. And of course, The Structural Study of Myth, 1955. We'll talk about both these important work, and especially that Savage Mind. You come across a couple of questions based on that. In both shift, you will face it. So make sure you are well versed with this particular topic because it's quite important, and definitely you're going to get one question based on that. Right. So first thing first, let's talk about who's that Strauss. Who's this Claude Lévi-Strauss? So we'll just talk about a little bit about his life. He was a French anthropologist and ethnologist who lived from 1908 to 2009. Now, when we say he's the father of modern anthropology, we are not exaggerating. His work laid the foundation for some of the most exciting ideas in the field. So, what made him stand out? Lévi-Strauss was all about structuralism. He even snagged the International Nonino Prize in Italy in 1986, which is a pretty big deal in the world of academia. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of structuralism. Lévi-Strauss looked at culture like they were intricate puzzles. He wanted to understand how all the pieces fit together, and this approach was groundbreaking. Ever heard of Pansies for Thought? Lévi-Strauss was all about wordplay. In French, pensée means both thought and pansy, and sauvage, or doesn't quite mean like savage in English. It's more like wild or untamed. He borrowed the idea of pansies for thought from Shakespeare Hamlet, adding a touch of literary flair to his work. The savage mind, which is quite important for your exam also. And if you are interested in the structuralism, of course, this is quite important. Right, so Levi-Strauss also introduced the concept of bricolage in it itself. And it's like creative problem solving with whatever tools you have lying around. His book, The Savage Mind, published in 1962, wasn't just about primitive thought, it explored how all human thinks. The first half covered Levi Strauss's idea on culture and the mind, while the second half expanded into a deep dive into history and social change. Now, here's an interesting part. Levi Strauss had a heated debate with Jean Paul Sartre about human freedom. Sartre believed in radical freedom, the idea that we are free to do whatever we want. Levi Strauss, on the other hand, was all about structure. This debate left echoes in the world of anthropology and inspired thinkers like Pierre Bourdieu. Now let's talk about mythologies here. We have the structural study of myth and another is mythologicus. So we'll go one by one. But anyway, let's talk about this first. Now Levi Strauss was quite the adventurer anthropologist. He decided to take a myth on a wild ride, starting from the tip of the South America and traveling all the way up to Arctic Circle. Can you imagine that road trip? But it wasn't just a joyride. It was a quest to understand how this myth changed as it spread across the Western Hemisphere. His series of books called Mythologicus is like a Netflix binge for mythology enthusiasts. In these books, he traces the cultural evolution of this myth. It's like watching a story transform as it travels, picking up new ideas and flavors along the way. Now let's quickly look at the structural study of myth 1955. Remember the date and also the work. So this structural study of myth, in this article, Levi-Strauss was like the captain of ship, charting a course for anthropology. He discussed how we should approach the study of myth. He insisted that myths are like a language. They have to be told to exist. Just like we use words to communicate, myths are how ancient folks communicated their stories and beliefs. Levi-Strauss thought myths were super cool because they are almost always set way back in time, in some sort of timeless space. So you can think of myth as these ancient eternal tales that have been passed down through generations, like your grandma's secret cookie recipe, right? But here's where it gets even interesting. Levi Strauss believed that myth were even more complex than language itself. He talked about langue and parole. Think of these as the structure and the actual speech. So myth have this intricate structure like the grammar of language, but they also have the unique stories just like the sentences we speak. Now, if you want to sound like a pro when discussing Levi Strauss at your next intellectual gathering, you can also mention his book, The Savage Mind from 1962. In this one, he introduces the concept of bricolage, as I told you before, which is like making something out of whatever you have lying around. It's like the ultimate do it by yourself, right? And speaking of ultimate showdown, Levi Strauss had a debate with the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. They went head to head on the nature of human freedom in existential philosophy. It was like a philosophical boxing match, but with words, right? So to sum it up, Claude Lévi-Strauss was the Indiana Jones of anthropology, taking us on epic mythological adventure. He believed that myths were like languages with their own grammar and stories, and he even had a tangle with Sartre in the name of intellectual exploration. Now let's talk about Roland Barthes. So who was Roland Barthes? Well, he was this super cool French dude who wore many hats. He was a literary theorist, essayist, philosopher, critic, and even a semiotician. And he basically spent his time thinking about the stuff and writing about it. And now, what made Barthes stand out was his obsession with sign systems. Yeah, I know it sounds a bit nerdy, but bear with me. He was all about looking at signs in our culture, especially the ones we find in Western pop culture. You know, things like advertisement, movies, and even everyday objects. So he would analyze them to see what they reveal about our society. And one of the most important work is Mythology, which was published in 1957. And this thing was like a treasure trove of insights into pop culture. He wrote about everything from wrestling matches to soap powder. I mean, who does that, right? But Barthes was these things as modern myths that tell us something deeper about our world. So, this mythology actually examines contemporary social values, and it also creates modern myth. And basically, it focuses on semiology and mythogenesis, which is quite important. So, it also adds a second level to Saussure's analysis. And as we know, in modern day, mythology and myths are quite important, and that's what Roland Barthes studied in this particular collection. And also one of the important thing is that it is split into two sections. As you can see, one is a collection of essays on selected modern myth, and the second is provides a further and general analysis of concepts. Right, and as we know, Roland Barthes is quite famous for his ideas like structural analysis of narrative, death of the author, writing degree zero, effect of reality, SNZ. And these all we're gonna talk about in our next slides. We'll begin with the death of the author. So picture this, it's the beginning of 1960s. Our Roland Barthes, who's French intellectual superstar, right, drops a literary bombshell called the death of the author. Now, don't worry about it. No authors were harmed in the making of this essay. It's just the name of it, and you'll get to know what things are inside this particular essay. So, in this essay, Barthes throws shade at the traditional way of analyzing literature. You see, back in the day, literary critics used to put author on a pedestal. They would dig into the author's life, their intentions, their biography, you name it, all in a quest to figure out what the heck the author meant in their writing, right? But Barthes, being the rebel he was, right, said no, let's not do these kind of things. He argued that it's not about what the author intended, it's about what the reader takes from it. He's all about the reader being the boss when it comes to interpreting a text. He also said, let's not put a straight jacket on a text, right? See, he believed that if we tie a text down to one correct interpretation based on the author's life, we are doing it a disservice. And instead, he encouraged us to let a text be a wild, free creature with multiple meaning. Now, he didn't stop there. Barthes dropped some real pearl of wisdom. He said that a text is the tissue of quotation. Think of it as a fancy patchwork quilt made up of bits and pieces from all over the places, rather than just one person's experience. He was also pals with Marcel Proust. You know, the guy who wrote those thick books about time and tea and stuff, right? And Barthes said that Proust was all about blurring the lines between the writer and the character. It's like the characters in Proust's book were giving the authors a run for his money. And to make it even more interesting, Barthes throws in a story by Henry de Balzac. That is quite important because in previous exam they asked about the death of the author, and they also particularly asked like which author was mentioned by Barthes. So it was Henry de Balzac, you know, the guy falling in love with castrato just to mess with our hearts a little, right? And he liked to keep us on our toes. So that was uh, Henry de Beljac, right? That who wrote about a guy falling in love with castrato. Right, so in a nutshell, Barthes was all about setting the author free, giving readers the power, and letting text be these multi layered, mysterious creature. So, next time you're reading a book, remember it's not about what the author had for breakfast, right? It's about what you see in those pages. Now we'll move to another important topic, which is writing degree zero. And it's very important. We're going to talk about both here, writing degree zero and also SNZ, SOZ, 1970. Right, we'll begin with writing degree zero. So Barthes wrote writing degree zero back in 1953. And it's like the intro to the history of writing. It's got two parts, kind of like a superhero origin story, theory, and then critique. First, he's all about distinguishing writing from style. Like imagine you have a cake and writing is the recipe while style is the icing on top. He's not keen on those socialist realist writer. He's like, you know, guys, let's break free from those conventional literary tropes. Barthes is all about transparent, colorless writing. Think of it as writing without all the frills and fancy stuff. He's got a soft spot for Albert Camus and Raymond Queneau. He even mentioned Camus' book The Stranger. So in that case, this particular book, Writing Degree Zero, becomes important because, as you know, in exam, whatever the reference is there in a particular work, that they ask. So remember that Camus' The Stranger was mentioned in Roland Barthes' Writing Degree Zero, which was published in 1953. Got it? And again, that Cuneo is like the godfather of a spoken speech influence. He's all about making language sound real, like how people talk. So Barthes is like, hey Sartre, your writing style is a bit much. He's all about that simple, straightforward stuff. Right, so he's got this utopian vision of literary language. He wants a language that doesn't make you feel like an alien. It's like searching for the perfect world of words. Now let's quickly move to SNZ, which was published in 1970. Now fast forward to 1970, and Barthes dropped that S or Z or S/Z, where he dissects Balzac's Saracen. Remember that again in SNZ they have mentioned who? They mentioned Balzac's Saracen or Saracen. So this dude is kind of at the crossroads of structuralism. He's got these five codes going on, and remember these five codes are hermeneutic, proeretic, semic, symbolic, and cultural. All these five codes are important. You should know about it. Anyway, you'll get the PPT and there you can make notes. Otherwise, you can just take a screenshot. Anyway, they are like the secret decoder rings of literary analysis. So first, hermeneutic code is all about uncovering text mysteries. It's like solving a literary puzzle. And again, proaeretic or proaeretic codes create the narrative tension like a good suspense movie. And we have semicode, and that deals with character connotation. It's like reading between the lines to figure out who's who. And we have symbolic code is like all about those deep themes and structures in the text. It's like the hidden messages in your favorite song lyric. And at the end we have cultural code, and that draws on the stuff we all know. It's like those inside jokes only your close friends. Barthes says, hey reader, you're not just here to passively read, you're an active detective in this literary mystery. He's influenced by Saussure, another linguistic genius, but Barthes isn't a fan of narratology's rigid system. He's all about the code being interwoven, not set in stone. So these codes can flip and flop, and that's cool with Barthes. He wants to keep that text multivariance alive and kicking. And remember, these codes are like secret agents in your head, shaping how you understand a text. Hermeneutic code reveals secrets, priority code creates tension, semicode deals with connotation, and cultural code taps into what we all know. Now I just want to talk about read early versus write early. It's quite important, and here in the slide it's not mentioned, but when I edit the slide you will get that. So let me tell you about these read early versus write early text. So Barthes came up with these cool terms, right? These read early and write early. But what do they even mean? If you know, you can write in the chat box or comment box. Anyway, read early text, in a simple word, I would put like imagine your typical classic novel, like something by Jane Austen. Okay, these are read early texts. They basically hand you the story on a silver platter. You read, and the author tells you exactly what's what. It's like watching a movie but with words. On the other hand, write early. Now think about those trippy experimental books where you scratch your head and go, what the heck did I just read? Right? And those are right early texts. They don't hold your hand, they make you work for it. Barthes says they force you to create your own meaning. It's like a literary puzzle. So I hope now you will know what is read early text and write early text. Okay, guys, so Barthes even gets, deeper, and Barthes had some deep thoughts about these stuff. He believed that write early text put you in the driver's seat. They are like an open playground where you get to create your own reality. No one's telling you what to think. And you might be wondering, who cares, right? Well, Barthes had a point. He thought that write early text, by making you an active participant, could free you from being a passive consumer. You're not just munching on someone else's story, you're actually cooking up your own version. Right? And we also talked about the death of the author right here itself. So he basically said in the death of the author, hey, forget about the author's intention. What matters is what you or the reader make of the text. Right? So that is all in a nutshell, if you ask me. This is all about Roland Barthes. We talked about the death of the author, mythology, writing degree zero, SNZ, read early, write early. So almost we have covered every single thing, right? So that's all, guys, for Roland Barthes. We immediately move to Mikhail Bakhtin, who is quite important in our exam also, and also in structuralism. So let's start. So picture this, late 1800 to mid 1900, especially in Russia. That's the time and place where our guy Bakhtin was doing his thing. He was more than just a philosopher. He was a literary wizard and an all-around scholar. So what's the big deal with Bhakti? I know that's what you're wondering right now. Well, he cooked up some groundbreaking stuff. First off, he whipped up a whole new way of looking at language. It's like he put language in a blender and out popped these fancy terms like heteroglossia. We'll talk about it later. Bakhtin was also the novel guru. He didn't just read novels, he dissected them like a biologist studying a rare species. He came up with this grand theory of the novel, and it's not your usual book report, right? And one of the important thing that you should know, that these terms and the idea will start with heteroglossia, dialogism, chronotope, carnivalesque, and polyphony. All these we're gonna talk about. So but before that, we have to look at this toward a philosophy of the act, quite important. So what is this? Anyway, it's all about ethics and aesthetics, the deep stuff, right? Bakhtin takes a swipe at Kant, and you know the famous philosopher, right? Bakhtin claims on uniqueness, and these three truths are active and passive participation in being, Our uniqueness is there, but we gotta show it off, right? And imperative to actualize one's uniqueness means because we are one of a kind, right? We have got to flaunt it. So all these are important. So Bakhtin wasn't into like shallow thinking. He said, my unique thoughts are like a shark in the whole cosmic bonfire of life. In other words, we are all parts of this big, beautiful universe, and our uniqueness is our like little contribution to cosmic mixtape. Now let's move quickly to one of the important thing that, of course, in exam you may encounter and you often encounter, which is problem of Dostoevsky's Poetics. It is here you will get polyphony, unfinalizability, and carnivalization. So Bakhtin's work mainly involved around literature and language, and one of his standout pieces, The Problem of Dostoevsky's Poetics, which was written around 1929. Now, what's so special about this book? Well, Bakhtin introduced some pretty cool concepts. One of the biggest is the idea that you can't define a person solely based on external factors. He believed that our inner thoughts and feelings are just as important, if not more so. Bakhtin also had a bone to pick with the Western tradition of trying to neatly finalize and categorize everything. He thought that was a no go, and he wanted to keep things open and free. And he used the term unfinalizability to describe this idea. But here, where it gets really interesting, Bakhtin loved Dostoevsky's work, and he thought Dostoevsky was a master at something called carnivalization. This isn't about like clowns and cotton candy folks, right? It's about Dostoevsky's way of turning societal norms upside down. Think of it as a literary rebellious against the status quo. Bakhtin believed that in Dostoevsky's world, everything was turned on its head during the carnival social hierarchies. Tossed aside proper behavior. Forget about it. It's all about the joyful relativity or just having a good time in the festival of life. Now there's this quote from Bakhtin that I absolutely love, and here I quote: opposites came together, look at one another, are reflected in one another, know and understand one another. It's like a literary dance of where conflicting ideas get. Now we'll just talk about Rabelais and his world, Carnival and Grotesque. So Bakhtin wasn't just about Dostoevsky. He also went deep into the world of Francois Rabelais, who was a French Renaissance writer. Bakhtin's big idea here was to uncover the hidden parts of Rabelais' work that people had ignored or swept under the rug. He also looked at the balance between allowed language and the forbidden kind. Like what's acceptable to say in polite company and what's not. It's all about how society defines what's okay and what's not through language. And then there are these two other cool things that Bakhtin talked about: carnival and grotesque. Carnival for Bakhtin wasn't just a party, it was a social institution where norms were temporarily forgotten, and grotesque realm. And if you ask what is grotesque realm, that's a literary style where things get, well, a bit weird and exaggerated. So, in a nutshell, Bakhtin was all about shaking things up in the world of literature and language. He wanted us to question the status quo, embrace the messiness of life, and dance to the rhythm of our own words. Now we'll move to one of the important work of Bakhtin, as you can see over your screen, the Dialogic Imagination, Chronotype and Heteroglossia. So these two terms are quite important. That's where we are going to focus. So his big book, The Dialogic Imagination, published in 1975, is basically a collection of his brainy essays. And he throws around three big concepts like heteroglossia, dialogism, and chronotope. And let's break these down in a simple term. Heteroglossia. This is all about how meaning in language isn't just about the words themselves, but also about the context they are used in it. It's like saying it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Another is dialogism. Dialogism, as you can see here, Bakhtin was all about dialogue, not just in novels, but in life too. He thought real human life was like an ongoing conversation. It's like how we chat with our whole bodies, not just our voice, right? Another is chronotope, and this is a fancy word for alert. It basically means how time and space are connected in stories. When authors write, they're building words and they use the real world around them to make those fictional ones feel real. Now, Bakhtin wrote four essays in this book, and each one is like a gem in the treasure chest of literary theory. Epic and novel. Very important here. Remember that these four essays are quite important. First is epic and novel. This one's all about how the novel is like the cool kid in the literary block. It loves diversity and embraces different genre, unlike the epic, which wants to stick to tradition. Again, is from the prehistory of novelistic discourse 1940. So here Bakhtin shows us how all these old texts from the past come together to form the modern novel. It's like he's connecting the dots in the evolution of storytelling. The third one is forms of time and the chronotope in the novel. Here he really gets into that chronotope thing we talked about earlier, right? He shows how novels use time and space to create unique experience for reader. And at the end we have discourse in the novel, which is like 1934 to 1935. It was published between that or written between that. And this one is a real meaty one. Bakhtin talks about this, his philosophy of language, and he introduces the idea of heteroglossia, which is all about the qualities of language that aren't just about words, but about our perspective, evolution, and beliefs. Right. So this is all things that we have discussed here, guys. And again, what I'm gonna do, I'll just share this particular PDF that you can download, and everything is there. And of course, if you want to do all the quizzes, you can just download our app, Nerd School, and do it there. We have lots of MCQs, lots of mock tests, lots of rapid fire mock tests. You just name it, everything you'll find it there. Now guys, this was all about Bakhtin. Now let's move to another important character, or the writer, if you can say, is Umberto Eco. And here we're going to talk about The Role of the Reader, which was published in 1979, and of course The Name of the Rose. Now the lecture is not long, I think 10-15 more minutes and we are done. I know you might be feeling that it's a quite lengthy lecture, but remember that in 1 hour you are learning whole A to Z about structuralism, and it's very important that you don't have time to watch again and again, right? You just watch everything in one, and that's where we have like added everything. We just move section by section. Like in previously we talked about formalism, where we included or formalist, theorist, or critic, and before that we talked about subaltern, you name it. We almost talked about every single thing in literary criticism, theory, and of course culture studies. Right, now let's quickly come back to Umberto Eco. So if you ask who was this Umberto Eco, well, he was quite the Renaissance man. Even though he lived in the 20th century, he did it all. Medieval studies, philosophy, semiotics, wrote novels, critiqued culture, and had a say in politics as well. If you wanted a well-rounded thinker, then Eco was your guy. The first thing, the role of the reader. One of his interesting work is The Role of the Reader, which came out in 1979. It's all about semiotics and the philosophy of language. Now, semiotics, might sound like some heavy stuff, right? But it's essentially the study of science and symbols. Eco looked at how we engage with science in literature and how readers actively participate in making meaning out of a text. This book played a big role in shaping literary theory. Now, the name of the roses. Now, let's talk about a novel that made Eco a household name, which is The Name of the Roses. It was published in 1980s. It's like a historical murder mystery set in a 14th century monastery. Imagine Sherlock Holmes but in a medieval church. A Franciscan friar investigates a mysterious death of illuminator, and this leads to theological debates. There are deaths connected to the seven trumpet from the Bible, a poisoned book secret room, and a menacing character named George. Aristotle Poetics even makes an appearance in this mix. It is a serial killer on the loose, or is there some divine plan at play? And don't forget the library fire that destroyed the abbey, which is a pivotal moment in the story. William, our interpreter investigator, goes through a crisis of faith while his buddy Adzo tries to salvage whatever left from the fire. All of this against the backdrop of medieval theological dispute and the Inquisition getting involved in the murder investigation. And there's a forbidden library room that spills all sort of secrets. And it's a story where symbolism is cleverly woven into the plot. We won't go deeper into this particular work, but it's basically a novel, right? And here we are in literary journey, but it's quite important because of the symbolism that Umberto Eco has put. So in that case, this particular book became very important in criticism and theory also. And another one of the important work of Umberto Eco is the Foucault's Pendulum, which was published in 1988. This one's actually is a novel that dwells into semiotics too. It's divided into 10 segments, each represented by something called the 10th Psi or Sephiroth. So the novel is a super satirical and is loaded with obscure references to things like Kabbalah, alchemy, conspiracy theory. It's so jam-packed with stuff that some folk even suggested it needed an index. So that's why these works quite important. And some of the notable ideas that you can see here, starting with the open work. This is actually also called like opera aperta. It's basically the idea that a work of art like a novel or a painting isn't a closed book. Instead, it's an open to interpretation, and each reader or viewer can bring their own meaning to it. It's like your favorite song that means one thing to you and something completely different to your friend. Then there is another that is the intention of the reader, or in simple word or difficult word if you can say, intentio lectoris. And this is all about how your personal intentions, feelings, and experience shape how you interpret a text. It's like when you read a book and see things in it that resonate with your own life. And lastly, there is this the limits of interpretation. Eco pondered how far we can go into interpreting a text. Can we ever truly grasp its full meaning, or are there always some limits to what we can understand? It's like trying to unlock all the secrets of great novel. So guys, this was all about Umberto Eco. We'll quickly move to two more important structuralists here, Yuri Lottman and Jacques Herman. So Yuri Lottman, as we know, he's a Russian Estonian literary scholar, semiotician, and historian of Russian culture. Why is famous? Because of the Tartu Moscow semiotic school. Another is Jacques Herman, who is like a French literary theorist, and he was a faculty member of the Yale University French department from 1961 until he died in 1970. He is very important because he was an editor of Structuralism, Yale French Studies. So in that case, this guy is important. But anyway, that was all about Now we'll move quickly to one of the important figure in structuralism, who is Northrop Frye. And we'll begin, little bit we'll talk about his life. So this guy was a Canadian literary wizard who rocked the 20th century. Seriously, this guy's ideas are still shaking things up today. So when the whole deconstruction movement was all the rage, Frye was like, nah, I'm sticking to my structural guns. Some folk even thought he was a bit stubborn about it, but you know what they say. Different strokes for different folks. Right? Harold Bloom, another big shot at that time in literary world, once said that Frye was the top dog when it came to studying Western literature. His book Anatomy of Criticism basically put him on the map. Now let's get into some juicy stuff. Frye talked about language and metaphor. When a language links the speaker and the object, it's like poetry magic. That's when we get metaphors, right? Ever heard of the motive of metaphor by Wallace Stevens? Frye dug it up. And it's all about our desire to connect things like our inner feelings, and the big wide world metaphors help us to do just that. Frye believed that natural world and the human worlds were like best friends forever. They created symbols together. It's like saying, hey nature, you're kind of like us humans and we are kind of like you. So this idea turned into allegories, which are like stories in disguise. And guess what? These allegories are like the bread and butter of literature. You can't find them all over the place, especially in the Bible and those ancient Greek and Roman tales. Now we'll just move quickly. One of the important work of Northrop Frye is Fearful Symmetry, and it is all about a study of William Blake, which was published in 1947. Frye's intention was like saying simple thing. He said like, don't try to crack the Blake code, just interpret. Basically, he's actually saying take a look at Blake's stuff in the context of his time and society, not don't judge him by the present scenario, right? So that was all about study of William Blake, Fearful Symmetry, that Northrop Frye wrote about it. So that's all for Fearful Symmetry. Now we'll immediately move. One of the most important work is Anatomy of Criticism, which is a collection of 4 essays, which was published in 1957. This book is like the holy grail of literary criticism, and it's where we are gonna focus today. Right, and Frye had this ambitious goal with his book. He wanted to give us a grand overview of literary criticism, the theory, the principle, the techniques, all of it, guys. And he didn't just pull this stuff out of thin air. He took inspiration from literature itself. It's like he went to literature and said, hey, what can you teach me about criticism? So the book has a cool structure. It's like a sandwich with 4 essays in the middle, and a polemical introduction and a tentative conclusion, holding everything together. So those 4 essays have some pretty fancy title. And as you can see, historical criticism, theory of mode, ethical criticism, theory of symbols, and archetypical criticism, a theory of myths, and at the end, the 4th one, rhetoric criticism, theory of genre. Now Frye had a thing for reason. Right, he compared them to genre, like a stage, and even myths. It goes like something. Spring, here you can see, spring is like comedy representing birth and life's beginning. Summer is all about romance, youth, and growth, signifying triumph and harmony. And autumn, on the other hand, is where tragedy comes in, with old age and maturity embodying the myth of fall, decay, and separation. Lastly, which is winter, is the season of irony, symbolizing death and chaos, with myths of darkness and, well, chaos. There you have it, a quick look on Northrop Frye, and everything is we have covered here. So now we'll just quickly move to our last topic, which is Jonathan Quillis. And I know you might have got the sense of relief a little bit because it's the last one, and remember the last one is always the bigger one, right? Okay, I'm kidding. Let's start. So who is Jonathan Quillis? Well, He's this American literary critic who spent a lot of time teaching at Cornell University. He's got his hands deep in structuralism, literary theory, and all that good stuff. One of the famous books is Structuralist Poetics. And this, think of it as your gateway drug into the wild world of French structuralist thought. But in English, this book is where he starts talking about how language and culture are like peas in a pod. One of the most important thing is literary theory, a very short introduction, 2007. In this one, he's all about exploring what literary theory is all about. He says it's the big mix of stuff like structuralist linguistic. Remember that from earlier we talked about anthropology, right, and Marxism, semiotics, sign and symbols, psychoanalysis, and old literary criticism. So everything is there. If you really want an introduction about literary theory, guys, you should buy this book, or even you can get the ebook of this particular book. But remember, reading big books only takes time. You do it when you are really doing research, and if you're if you're reading regarding your exam, then I think it'll be like waste of time reading all of these. No. So that's why we have the lecture here. And of course, in your exam, that's all you needed, not more than that. Fuller got this cool idea that instead of just saying, hey, these are the rules of literature, we can actually use all these fancy theories to figure out how those rules are made. It's like peeking behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. He's also big on this thing called interpretation. He thinks we shouldn't just read a text to understand it, but we should dig deeper into how people interpret it. Who knew reading a book could be so complicated, right? Another one we have that Kuhler's structuralist poetics. Structuralism, linguistics, and the study of literature. Quite important in structuralism. When speaking of readers, Keller talks about competent reader. Remember that term they always ask, competent readers. So these are the folk who really get what's going on in a text. But here's the different competent readers might see the same text in a different way. It's like a literary version of those optical illusion. Euler even split readers into two classes, and these two classes, as you can see here, the first, there are the readers who are like a playground of critic, like him. And the second one is the future readers will benefit from the work of the critic, and previous readers have done it. So guys, that is all about structuralism, and I would like to conclude quickly whatever we have studied. So all right, folks, we have taken a whirlwind tour through the world of structuralism, literary theory, and some of the key thinkers who have shaped these fields, from Saussure groundbreaking ideas on language to Kuhler's take on interpretation. It's clear that the study of literature and language is saying but straightforward, right? And we have even how thinkers like Roland Barthes challenge tradition notions of authorship and meaning, how Claude Lévi-Strauss explored the structure of human thought, and how Mikhail Bhakti delved into the rich complexity of dialogue and culture. Northrop Frye brought us the idea of literary genres mirroring the season of life, and Umberto Eco wove semiotics into his novel. And let's not forget about the detective work of Umberto Eco's The Name of the Roses, on the intricate conspiracy of Foucault's Pendulum. So in the end, it's clear that the world of literary theory is a diverse and ever evolving landscape. It's a place where ideas clash, merge, and spark new understanding of how language, culture, and literature intersect. So as you venture forth in your literary exploration, remember that there is no one size fits all answer, right? Interpretation is an art, and the richness of literature lies in its ability to mean different things to different people. Keep your mind open, my fellow learners, and keep exploring the fascinating world of words and ideas. So guys, that's all for today. Remember to like the video and follow the channel, and if you don't want to miss, and again I would like to mention, tomorrow we're going to talk about post-structuralism, another important topic. And thank you all, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye, and have a good